Coming up, a very special daytime to mark World AIDS Day. We're going to provide you with some information, hopefully dispel some myths, and actually offer some hope. That is our topic today on Daytime. Stay with us. Welcome to Daytime. It is December 1st, and that not only marks the beginning of a new month, but it also marks World AIDS Day. The first World AIDS Day was held in 1988 and has been held every year since. The thing with AIDS, I think, HIV/AIDS, is that a lot of people either have misconceptions or have misinformation or have just thoughts that they believe to be true that aren't necessarily. We have a lot of numbers, we have a lot of statistics for you today, but we also have a lot of people and a lot of stories to tell, and it's going to be an interesting 1 hour, and I think you'll come out of this knowing a lot more than you did going in. I know I will, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with our guest today about World AIDS Day 2016. And our first guest is the Interim Executive Director of the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, Bruce Rankin. Welcome to Daytime, Bruce.
Thanks, it's a pleasure to be here.
So in your capacity with the HIV/AIDS Connection, I guess your main job really is just spreading information and making sure people understand more about HIV/AIDS.
Yes, Ontario actually has a very well articulated strategy to address HIV with regards to prevention, testing, getting people into treatment, getting people to stay in treatment, and hopefully helping people to achieve what we call an undetectable viral load, which is great news in that HIV. The latest research is showing that a person who has achieved an undetectable viral load cannot transmit HIV at this point in time. So we've made tremendous advances over the last few years. It's a good news year.
Yeah, and I was thinking, and we were discussing briefly about the 80s, and I was around in the 80s as a news reporter, and as AIDS was emerging and we were defining it and discovering it and realizing the connection between HIV and AIDS. And at that time, so little was known, and it was really, in most cases, seen as a death sentence. If somebody acquired HIV, they were going to get AIDS and they were going to die. That's certainly changed. It
has. Today, HIV is considered to be a manageable chronic illness, but a person who is in treatment, taking medications every day, is expected to have a very long, happy life, hopefully. There are other issues, however. When you refer back to the 1980s and some of the myths and so on, fear that people had. It is 2016, and unbelievably, a couple of weeks ago, our local newspaper had a headline that said, AIDS-infected spitter gets suspended sentence, which is really sad to see in 2016. We know that HIV is not transmitted in saliva. So that type of information is really misinformation and just promotes stigma about HIV that we now have the science to dismiss.
Yeah, and I suspect whoever wrote the headline wasn't writing it out of malice. It was just misinformation and maybe an assumption that had never been corrected.
Perhaps. I would think that in 2016, most Canadians would know that HIV is not transmitted in saliva. Perhaps, maybe not, but certainly a journalist should know, I would think.
Well, and you know, always double checking, and something as important and as sensitive as this, you don't need to have any publication or broadcaster going out there just spreading information that's not true.
Correct.
So I guess one of the things you talked about there in passing was this idea of stigma. And certainly in the 80s and into the 90s and even to some extent today, there's been a stigma associated with being HIV positive. I take it you're trying to fight back against that.
We are. That's a big part of what we try to do with our education programs. HIV is transmitted through 5 different bodily fluids. It is not an easy virus to acquire, and yet a lot of these fears do persist. There was a study done in Canada in 2012 around attitudes towards HIV, and it did reveal, people still had a lot of fears about issues like, oh, if my child was in a classroom with another child that had HIV, I might be concerned about that. Or if I had a coworker that I knew was HIV positive, I would be concerned about that. And these are issues that really shouldn't be causing us concern at all.
But they are. and a lot of people just don't know. I mean, in some ways, a lot of people I don't think have moved too far from those views of the 80s and 90s, and that's got to be frustrating for you.
It certainly is. It is, yes. But again, the best we can do is to try to keep educating people, and reiterate what the actual scientific facts are, not the fears and the stigma.
You've long been involved with the John Gordon Home. Tell me about it, and tell me about your role with that.
Sure. I was the executive director of the John Gordon Home from 2009 until 2015, at which time the John Gordon Home amalgamated with Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. It is a tongue twister, and we've been operating as a single entity since 2015.
And for those who don't know, just tell us about John Gordon Home.
Sure. It is a residential healthcare facility. We provide transitional care, respite care, and end-of-life care to people with HIV, perhaps full-blown AIDS, and also people with Hep C and related illnesses.
So it's at least there's a place.
The story of the John Gordon Home is incredible in that in its 25-year trajectory, it went from being an end-of-life care facility where people at the peak of the AIDS epidemic in Ontario were going to spend their last days, to a place that provides transitional care. So what we do today is we help people get onto treatment, have proper nutrition, attend to their other healthcare needs, and then move on and hopefully live a long, healthy life.
Well, and you said right off the top, you said this is a good news year. 2016 is a good news year. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, there's a lot of information now emerging about the science of HIV and achieving an undetectable viral load. So there was something referred to as the partner study earlier this year that did prove that people with HIV who had an undetectable viral load were not transmitting the virus. So that has huge implications for prevention and just the success of the treatments that we have today. And
tell me a little bit before we go, because we're running out of time, about the London Vigil.
December the 1st on the church on Dundas and Hale. It's just a little bit south of Dundas Street on Hale. At 7 p.m. Every year. We've had a vigil at some location in the city, really to remember those who have passed away over the years from HIV-related illnesses, to honor their lives and to really, I guess, come together as a community and also celebrate
Okay, well, we're just out of time in this segment, but that is tonight at 7 o'clock then, and you certainly welcome everybody to attend.
Absolutely, it's open to the public.
Okay, Bruce Rankin, the interim executive director of the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection with us. And up next, although there's good news, there are still people living with AIDS, lots of them. We're going to talk about some of the challenges with that when we continue at Daytime. Did you know in 2014 an estimated 2,570 people acquired HIV in Canada? Approximately 7 Canadians acquire HIV every day. For more information about HIV, AIDS, and services provided locally, please visit HIVAIDSconnection.ca. Welcome back to this special edition of Daytime, taking a look at World AIDS Day here on December the 1st. And as I said off the top, there's a lot of stats and a lot of facts and figures about AIDS, also a lot of misinformation, and we're trying to clear some of that up today. But there's also at the heart of all of this, it's about people. There are people's stories, and that's where I think we learn the most. And our next guest knows quite a bit about this. Is Rob Newman, who's a peer support worker with the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. Welcome to Daytime, Rob.
Thank you.
When were you first diagnosed with HIV?
It'll be 26 years next month, December 10th.
Okay, and I asked you a question to which you gave me a surprise answer. I said, has the HIV developed into AIDS?
So I'm no scientist, nor am I a doctor, but HIV is measured in numbers, blood levels, viral loads, and T cell counts. And when those numbers dip really badly, or raise, depending on the numbers, it can signify that you may have gone from HIV to AIDS. So my numbers have volleyed over the years, and sometimes I've found myself where the numbers aren't great, and so that would signify that I would have AIDS.
So you feel as though you sort of move in and out of AIDS.
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about, you said 28 years ago.
26 years.
26 years ago. Okay, so 1990.
Yep.
That was a time when getting an HIV diagnosis was still considered virtually a death sentence.
Yes, I was told to, pretty much to leave work, go on a disability pension, and prepare for the inevitable.
How did that go down with you at the time?
Not well, but I mean, what are you to do? I went home, I left work, I went on disability pension, I hired a lawyer, I put up my will, and did my best. So.
How old were you then?
29.
29 years old.
Yeah.
And most people at 29 are just into their careers and planning their lives
Yeah.
and deciding where, I'm sure you were in the same boat.
Yeah.
Suddenly at the age of 29, you're being told to sort of get your affairs in order.
Yes.
How has the journey gone over 26 years? When did you start to feel some hope that maybe this isn't going to be
Just over time. Without going into a lot of detail, I was diagnosed along with the majority of my family. So my wife at the time, 2 of our 3 children, we had all tested positive. So my wife passed away, one of my sons passed away. So you see that happening and you think, well, it's gonna happen to me soon. Flash forward 26 years, I'm well. My son, who was 18 months old when he was diagnosed, is now 27, and it wasn't important to us how it happened. It was more important than what we did everybody else.
So. What a horrible thing to have to go through with a young family, with a wife, with children, and to see them. I can't imagine.
It was, it was as far as we knew, waters that had not been yet explored. So we did the exploring ourselves.
Yeah. So now you're a peer support worker.
Yes.
And you're a peer in every sense of the word. You understand. How has that helped you? How has your job helped you in your journey?
Well, I've always been kind of a loud guy who will not sit quietly by. So it worked well for me that I get to work in a field that I know and to help people that I understand what they're going through, regardless of whether they've just been diagnosed or, like myself, living with HIV for a long time. I have a great team that I work with, and my job in that team is to give the HIV perspective.
You must be a real beacon of hope for people that have been recently diagnosed when they see you and see that.
I like to think so. When I was diagnosed, there was nobody around who had been HIV positive for 26 years. So now when people are diagnosed, I'm able to tell them that, that happened to me 26 years ago and I'm okay. And so let's do what we can.
Yeah. How can people avail themselves of that service? How does somebody get in touch with you, for example?
Well, they would contact the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, and I'm there every day, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and I'm always open to speak to people.
What does the support look like? How does it? How do you do what you do?
So, well, we have case managers, and they take care of the, the goings on and the issues for people living with HIV and their families. And I'm kind of the guy that when you don't really want a counselor, you just want to talk to somebody who knows what you're talking about. I'm that guy.
Yeah. Is it difficult, or do you find that now it's?
Of course it is. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I hear my own story coming back at me. So there are those moments. So, but it's also important to me to do that. So.
Yeah. So it's something you need to do.
Something that works for me. Yeah. By education, I have a legal education, but I could not possibly fathom being in a law firm. Yeah. The corporate setting isn't for me. The grassroots community work is where I feel I fit best.
We're just about out of time, but what does World AIDS Day mean to you individually?
Well, it's time that, I think communities get together and remember, honor, and celebrate those living with or affected by or at risk for HIV, and keeping that flame and that hope alive.
Yeah, and you remember specific people every year, I'm
Always.
sure, on December 1st.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Rob. Rob Newman, a peer support worker with the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. Thanks for coming in, and thanks very much for sharing your story. I know it's not easy, even after all these years.
Thank you.
when it comes to supporting people with HIV/AIDS, volunteers are at the very heart of it, and we're going to speak with one of those right after the break. Stay with us. Did you know almost 1 in 4 new HIV infections in Canada are among females? By the end of 2014, an estimated 75,500 Canadians were living with HIV. For more information on services provided, please visit hiv-aidsconnection.ca. Welcome back to our special World AIDS Day edition of Daytime on December the 1st. Again, December the 1st marks the beginning of a new month, but it always marks World AIDS Day and has since 1988. We've been talking a lot about the work that goes on at the Regional HIV AIDS Connection, and we're now going to speak with one of the volunteers there, Martin McIntosh. Martin, welcome to Daytime.
Thank you.
You were telling me you've been there for 5 years now.
Yeah, I've been working with the Regional HIV AIDS Connection for a beautiful 5 years.
You say a beautiful 5 years. What makes it beautiful?
It's a cause that I believe deeply in, and the people who gravitate to the agency, the volunteers, the staff, the supporters in the community, have a lot of heart and a lot of care for people who need that. With what they're going through.
I should make it clear, you're not personally a volunteer, but you do work with the many volunteers at...
Absolutely. I have that distinction of being the volunteer coordinator. Many people say, oh, so you volunteer. But I actually get to volunteer, to coordinate just over 100 volunteers every year. That's 100 volunteers.
100 volunteers. And
yeah.
so what are some of their duties? What are some of the things you would do if you were volunteering with RHAC?
Well, a lot of the volunteers actually help us with our harm reduction, because that's an important part of what we do for those at risk for HIV infection. But they also help with educational outreach, with some fundraising, and many other things that we need in terms of getting the message out there around awareness and promoting testing and care and treatment for those living with HIV and AIDS.
Where are we in 2016 in terms of general awareness? What's the average person's level of knowledge, do you think?
Well, that's a great question. I think it varies. I think everyone's probably heard of HIV and AIDS, but exactly what that means and all the things around it, how can it be transmitted, how many people are living with it, that seems to be a little bit shallow. So it's not a fully informed awareness. So we work diligently to increase that awareness, to populate it with the truth, with facts, to remove stigma, discrimination, some of those misbeliefs that actually are very harmful to those living with HIV, but also in terms of preventing the spread of HIV.
Before we get to the red scarf, tell me why it means so much to you individually.
For me, it's something that, when I was growing up here in London, I remember meeting people who were infected with HIV. Some of them have passed on. And today, I know many people who live with HIV, and I count them as great friends, great people. It means something to me because these are people. They're someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's father.
Yeah, and it is easy to just take any group. That doesn't matter. You can take any disease or any condition and see it as a thing, as opposed to people.
And I love seeing the people in it.
Yeah, and you do on a daily basis. You're wearing a red scarf. I don't think that's by coincidence.
No, not at all.
Tell me about it.
Today, being World AIDS Day, for years and years, as you're wearing a red ribbon, used to be the international symbol for raising AIDS awareness and rallying people to the cause. When I came to the agency 5 years ago, as you mentioned, it was just on the cusp. I started in October, and I saw all these people wearing red scarves. And somebody pointed out that when you actually fold it across your chest, it looks an awful lot like a red ribbon. So here's a way of amplifying that message. Yeah.
Your ribbon is significantly larger than my ribbon.
Yes, but we could get you one of these.
Don't need a contest.
I brought one for you, so we'll give that to you after, definitely.
So tell me about how people can get these then, because obviously this is a way to raise funds.
Yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, if I roll back 5 years ago, there were only 75 scarves that were knitted, in that first year. And I was like, what is this about? And since then, I've had the honor of working with the community. And now we have over 300 individuals within our database who are knitting for the cause, and a quarter of those are actually groups, so you can multiply that number. So this year, on this day, we are handing out just over 1,500 red scarves that were knitted by community members, individuals, members of concerned groups, some corporate entities, you name it. Our board members, everyone has gotten in on it, and I can assure you that even as I'm speaking, there's someone out there knitting a red scarf for next year.
Good stuff. If I wanted to be a volunteer, how do I go about doing that?
Well, you can reach me at the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. You can go on to our website at .ca, or you can give me a call. I'm at 519
434 1601.
Yes, and I'd be happy to have that conversation on how you can join in for this cause.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in today, Martin.
Thank you.
Thanks for explaining the scarf, and thanks for 5 years of working and trying to spread the word and make sure people understand the facts.
Thank you so much.
Coming up next, we're going to talk about focusing on harm reduction when it comes to HIV/AIDS. We'll discuss that after the break. Stay with us. Did you know 78 million people have acquired HIV since the start of the epidemic? In 2015, approximately 2.1 million people newly acquired HIV. For information on services provided locally, please visit hiv-aidsconnection.ca. Welcome back. This has been a fascinating show so far. I knew going in that I was going to learn some things. I knew I was going to hear some interesting stories, and I knew that I was going to get some personal anecdotes from people who've lived it. And we've had all that so far, and we're going to continue to discuss World AIDS Day and the many manifestations of it. And we're joined now by Sonia Burke, who's the Director of Counterpoint Harm Reduction Services. Hi, Sonia.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
You're very welcome. We wanted to talk about harm reduction, and so let's first of all talk about Counterpoint Harm Reduction Services. How did this come to be, and what does it do?
Well, Counterpoint is a service that provides supports to individuals who are experiencing addiction. And the continuum of addiction is very different for different people. And so Counterpoint's goal is to ensure that we're providing the supports that are necessary to help people address what's happening in their lives, and understanding that addiction is a healthcare issue and that we need to provide supports to people. So about 25 years ago, Regional HIV AIDS Connection started looking at how do we reach individuals who may be experiencing addiction, and understanding that the goal of harm reduction is to reduce the harms associated with drug use and stopping the spread of bloodborne illnesses. It's an evidence-based service. It's based on knowing that this is an effective way to support people to reduce the transmission of HIV and Hep C.
And you're a partnership with the Regional HIV/AIDS Connection then?
Well, it's a service throughout, or supported by Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, and we have several partners within the community that work with us in terms of ensuring that we have no wrong door for services for people with who are needing supports, and that we have partnerships with the Health Unit, London InterCommunity Health Centre, Infectious Disease Program, and it goes on and on, London Cares. So it is about understanding that people need the supports wrapped around them, and really providing multiple options for them, because the continuum is a very complex.
What are the greatest challenges you face in getting your services out there to the right people?
I think, one of the things that we're faced with the most is stigma, and people not understanding or not having an awareness of what harm reduction can support us as a community as a whole. It is about reducing the harms. I think there is more education that needs to happen to help people understand that addiction is actually a healthcare issue. It's not a moral issue. It's about providing supports to our community. There are costs associated with individuals who are struggling, and harm reduction can provide supports to reduce those costs. It's more, for us, it's not about getting our services and supports out to individuals who need us. It's more about changing attitudes. We're very well connected, and through our partnerships, both with the individuals we support, but also with our community. But really, it is about changing and shifting attitudes and supports within our community.
Hey, do you think, generally speaking, people really don't quite get it yet?
Yes. I think it's a complex issue, and I think it's fair that people, and we need to work together as a community to provide that information. If we don't provide that information, how are people to understand it? And that takes time. And I think that is something that we continue with all the supports. In every service that we do, things are so interconnected that it's shifting attitudes to help shift change.
Yeah.
And that's, that's not easy.
Well, you talked about stigma. Stigma certainly applies to drug use. Stigma applies to people with HIV/AIDS.
Yeah.
And it's such a tough wall to knock down.
It is, and then you add mental health on top of that, you add homelessness on top of that. I mean, the barriers one after the other, and really when you peel all that back, it's a human being who has family, who has friends, they're a mother, they're a brother, they're a sister, and that is what we're missing, and that's the shifting that we have to make in our community, is understanding that that's a person. Affected by multiple things.
Yeah, we talked about that multiple times during the show, about how you see so many facts and numbers and stats and things, and you forget that at the heart of it, there's a person.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So how do people, we're just about out of time, but how do people avail themselves of the services that you provide?
Well, they can contact us at our phone number, but we're located at 186 King Street. People are welcome to come in and see us. We have all the standard Facebook and all those good things, Twitter, social media. But I think what works best for us in reaching the individuals that we're trying to reach is word of mouth. Okay. And, if you talk to individuals who are experienced living on our streets or living in or experiencing addiction, then the reputation of the staff is really what sells.
Perfect. Thank you for coming in today, Sonia.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about anonymous HIV testing. Stay with us. Did you know HIV does not always produce symptoms? The only way to know your HIV status is to get tested. It's estimated 21% of HIV-positive Canadians don't know their status. For more information about HIV/AIDS and services provided locally, please visit hiv-aidsconnection.ca. Welcome back. One of the stats we've been running on the screen during the going into breaks mentioned that 21% of people who are HIV positive don't know that they're HIV positive, so that speaks to the importance of getting tested. And Ted Town is here. He's a counselor with the Options Clinic at the London InterCommunity Health Centre. Hi, Ted.
Hello there.
Okay, so tell me about the process, and then tell me how easy it is.
It's quite easy. What we're focusing on primarily for the rapid test, the finger prick test here, is for the funders. It's people who are injecting drugs, people who are First Nations descent, African, Black and Caribbean, men who have sex with men, and women who are in high-risk categories. That's where we're seeing the highest number of those who are infected who don't know about it. Okay. We can see people on a drop-in basis. They can make a phone call to us. Essentially what we do, because we are testing anonymously, all we know about somebody is the year of birth and their risk factors. So typically if somebody does test positive, public health finds it right away. When we do it anonymously, they know that someone who says he was born in 1987 and then says he's doing this has tested positive. Those results stay anonymous until the person goes for treatment. At that point, public health does know. Okay. So it gives people some breathing space if they do get heavy news.
And certainly the heavy news today is still admittedly heavy, but not as heavy as it would have been in the 80s
Absolutely
or 90s.
No. The treatment's extremely effective. We know that in a lot of cases it's a normal life expectancy. People can keep the viral load to the point that's very little risk of passing it on sexually. The challenge is when, as you say, 21% of people who don't know it have no evil intent. They just have no idea that they're infected, and they can put themselves at risk of getting sick as well as others. Okay, well, let's start the test. I mean, you do it anonymously. I'm choosing to do it. Okay, so all we know about you is you've been given a card with a 6-digit number on there, which you put on this panel here. Okay. This is the same accuracy as a blood draw. It's the only one that Health Canada has approved of. Okay. And people find the results.
Tell me what to do.
What you do, How shall I say this? You give me the finger.
Give you the finger.
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
give you the index finger.
That's
in this
good.
case,
Okay,
just, you know.
that's fine.
It's very much the same thing as if you donate blood.
Much the
first thing
same,
they do
yeah.
is they
Yep,
do a little finger prick, and then you're good to go.
And put my color
How many
coordinated things
people
on.
get tested each year?
We see about 1,000 people a year, and typically maybe 1% of those are positive, which is pretty much in keeping with most anonymous clinics.
Right.
Typically, I'll ask people if they want a countdown, but I usually don't wait for an answer because
then you're going to go, oh, it's going to hurt,
then it
which it
definitely
didn't at all.
hurts. Well, you're good.
No, it's just a routine thing.
And cold fingers tend to.
Was my finger cold?
I think you are. Yeah, you must be. The TV lights aren't heating you up enough, I guess.
Well, you know, we use fluorescence a lot nowadays.
That's
so
what
you
it is. There's none of that heat.
tend to have that
at
heat.
time. Now we also find if people are coming in, we say, please have a lot of water before you come in because a lot of people, they're just certainly now that we're in December and the winter's cold, people their fingers are cold. They're not bleeding the way they.
I apologize for not bleeding profusely.
If you just stand outside in the snowstorm and make some snowballs, and I'll give you this to hold on to there.
Okay, we'll cover that up there. All right.
So going
now
to.
what are you doing?
We're mixing it into here is the actual developing fluid. So this is mixed up. No, I should indicate the top half of this panel will react to HIV. I'm sorry, to blood going through. The lower half is only going to react if there are HIV antibodies detected.
Okay.
So as quickly as we're doing here, pour that in there.
Now, what do we look for then?
At this point, you won't see anything. But once that settles down into the little panel below, I'll add the developer here.
Okay.
So this is the actual the dilutant.
Yep.
So now you can see that's poured right through.
This is fascinating.
It is. It's amazing. We've had this about 7 or 8 years now. It's made a huge difference in terms of people's peace of mind.
What
to find
did you
out the
do
results.
before? How did you
It was a
test?
blood draw,
Okay.
and people would wait for their results to come back. Sometimes a week, sometimes a week and a half, the longest week and a half of their life, essentially.
Okay.
This way, people find out in a matter of a few seconds.
Yeah. What happens either way? Whatever
Either way?
turns up here.
Well, what we have here is that single dot at the top shows that it's worked. That shows there are no HIV antibodies detected. The lower half would have developed a dot at the same time if the sample had HIV positive blood in it.
Okay.
When that happens, we have to have a confirmatory test, either a blood draw through us or through public health or through their family doctor when they're ready. Because all that we can tell somebody is, well, you've got one dot there, you're HIV negative. But if there are 2 dots there, a doctor wouldn't accept that. So they need to have the blood work done for further testing to ensure.
Okay.
So I come back in the room. Of course, I've left the room in the time. Said 1 dot is showing HIV negative. Now these results are out of date. As soon as you
Okay.
get them, I make sure people know this. As soon as they get them, the results are 3 months old. So this means that that person tested negative the start of September.
Okay.
Or was negative the start of September. But if something happened a week or so ago, it's too early for this test to be accurate.
Okay.
But this has made a huge difference for people because in the past, we would have people not come back for the results. If they're marginalized, if they're sleeping rough, they've got all kinds of other things going on, they're not going to come back for a follow-up appointment. This way, they find out their status right away. If they are positive, we can hook them up with care right away.
Where are you located?
We're at 659 Dundas Street, which is between Adelaide and Lyle Street. We have a location at Huron and Highbury in the mall up there. We do a lot of outreach to Central Spa, to the Men's Mission. We're getting work at Pride Western up through the Rainbow Coalitions up there in Fanshawe College and at various First Nations groups around town. So we do enough. We're really increasing the amount of outreach that we're doing.
Okay, we're down to about 25 seconds. You have to make an appointment.
It's best to make so because we're kind of short-staffed right now. But we do see people on a walk-in basis whenever we can.
Okay, and you can, it's just fantastic. You can come in, you can have it done, you'll know
Yep,
one
you
way or
find
the
it right-
other, and then
exactly.
you can decide.
Yep, knowing is better. It's better to know.
Absolutely. Ted Town, counselor with Options Clinic, LIHC.
Yes, London
Thank you for
InterCommunity
coming
Health
in.
Centre. Thanks so much.
Appreciate
nice
that.
meeting you.
Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about research into HIV/AIDS. Stay with us. Did you know 36.7 million people worldwide are currently living with HIV/AIDS? Of that number, 1.8 million are children. For more information on services provided locally, please visit hiv-aidsconnection.ca. Welcome back. At the beginning of the show, our first guest, Bruce Rankin, who's the interim executive director of Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, said this is a year of, it's a good news year. 2016 is a good news year. And certainly our next guest can tell us a bit about that, because he gained national attention for research that he's been doing in trying to develop an HIV vaccine. It's Dr. Yong Kang. Welcome to Daytime again.
Thank you.
You were here last year. We appreciate you coming back. Dr. Kang is a molecular virologist and a professor at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry at Western. What was it, 2 years ago that you announced that
The phase 1 human clinical trials.
Yeah, so
Yes.
what was the announcement then, and what have you been doing since?
We announced that we were going into phase 1 human clinical trial of our vaccine, which is prophylactic vaccine, preventive vaccine to prevent HIV infection. But the phase 1 is to look at the safety of the vaccine that we have developed.
Okay, and where are we in 2016?
And we have completed the phase 1 human clinical trial, and we just submitted a paper, and which is accepted for publication actually last week, and it's going to be published soon.
Okay, so what have you found in phase 1?
So we found that our vaccine is totally safe, and also it can trigger immune responses, which means that the people who are vaccinated people can produce antibodies that can prevent HIV infection. So we hope to demonstrate that the antibodies produced in vaccinated people can actually prevent HIV infection.
Okay, so phase 1, good.
Right.
I assume there's a phase 2.
Yes. Now we are preparing for a phase 2 material, and there are 3 phases. Phase 1 is for the safety. Phase 2 is for immune responses, how we react to the vaccine. And then phase 3 is efficacy test to see whether or not this vaccine really prevents HIV infection.
Okay.
So we are going into phase 2.
Do you think there was some misconceptions about your initial announcement? Because I think there was that a lot of people thought, oh, we have a vaccine now that will prevent AIDS.
Not our vaccine. The vaccine produced by Sanofi Pasteur years ago. That was almost 5 years ago now. And they demonstrated that this is the so-called recombinant virus. They used the bird virus known as the Canary pox virus, and they put the AIDS virus genes into Canary pox. They vaccinated people with that recombinant Canary pox virus. And those vaccinees produced antibodies or protective immunity against HIV infection. And when they compare the vaccinated people with non-vaccinated controlled people, we call it placebo, and there was a 31% difference between the vaccinated and non-vaccinated people. So the whole world thought that we have a vaccine, but 31% of efficacy, especially with the small numbers, does not really
Not even 1 in 3.
A good protection. That's correct.
Yeah. Now, was your work happening concurrently, or did you follow that as kind of your guide?
Our vaccine development has been evolved in such a way that we learn from others, and our strategy of vaccine development is different from what has happened in the previous 4 clinical trials.
Okay. And with phase 2 then, what's the time frame you're looking at?
Once you have a material, and then you have to have a license from regulatory authorities, Health Protection Branch from Canada, if I want to do the test in Canada. And normally we go through the US FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And once we get the permission for the human clinical trials, then we go through it. And the testing period is maybe about less than a year for the phase 2. However, gathering the information and getting the permit and then process all the vaccination and then process all the samples coming from vaccination programs will take a year and a half.
So people will be getting the vaccine as part of the clinical trials,
Yes.
which will begin at some point, hopefully once you get these approvals from the Canadian and US officials.
Yes.
What would your best guess be in terms of when the trial will begin?
We hope to initiate the phase 2 trial sometime next year.
Next year.
Yes, well, next year is only a month away, but
Yeah, a
and
little later next
I'm talking about the later part of next year.
Yeah.
Yes.
So sometime in mid to late 2017, you'll actually
Yes.
be. How will you find people to take part in the trials?
Oh, there are many, many volunteers for the trials. In fact, I'm getting so many letters already by looking at the phase 1 clinical trial data. People are writing to me, and they wish to volunteer. But when we recruit actively, then we can get enough number of people to our trial.
I can't imagine it would be difficult to find volunteers. You mentioned the third phase would then be the efficacy of this vaccine. Does it work, in
That's
short?
right. That's correct.
And you obviously are trying to exceed 31%.
Absolutely.
Any way to predict what the efficacy would be?
Well, so far, I cannot tell how long, what kind of efficacy would be, but I hope that we can get the efficacy of better than 70% of protection.
And so people would that would take the vaccine.
Yes.
You're hoping that at least 70% of those
At
people
least
would
the
not
70%.
then go on to develop
That's
HIV.
That's correct.
It's, I mean, people are always looking for sort of a eureka moment. They're looking for some magical, oh, it's done. But that's not how it works.
No, it's not. But yeah, there are many different kind of antiviral vaccines for other viral diseases. And some viral diseases you can have as much as 90% efficacy. And so I hope that our vaccine can give a protection of more than 70% of HIV infections.
How many years now have you been working on this?
I've been working on about a decade.
A decade.
Yes.
And here we are. You must be so excited to be at that point where you're almost ready to begin human
Yes.
clinical trials.
That's correct.
Wow. I mean, just to be right in the middle of it, I can't imagine the
Yes.
excitement as
Right.
somebody in your field.
Yes, but there are also a lot of work and also a lot of difficult times to go through this whole process.
Yeah. Well, as we said off the top, 2016 is a time of optimism and a time of hope, I think, for people, even people living with HIV and AIDS. But in your case,
Yes.
being able to prevent it seems to be, that's the
Yes.
ultimate answer.
That's correct. And in fact, now HIV infection is not a death sentence. In fact, the HIV positive individuals can have a near normal life with active, actually, the therapy known as CART is a combination antiretroviral therapy.
Okay, we're just out of time. I do appreciate you coming in again this year, Dr. Kang. It's
My
always
pleasure.
fascinating to hear where you
Yes.
are in your research.
My pleasure.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you for having me.
After the break, we're going to talk about Arts for AIDS, the international event which celebrates 15 years this year. Stay with us. Did you know an estimated 35 million people have died from AIDS-related illnesses, including 1.1 million in 2015 alone? For more information about HIV, AIDS, and services you can find locally, please visit hiv-aidsconnection.ca. Welcome back to our special World AIDS Day edition of Daytime. And we just wanted to remind you of the London Vigil, which is taking place tonight at Trinity United Church. That's at 76 Dalton Street. The doors open at 6 p.m. and everyone's welcome to attend that to mark AIDS Day, International World AIDS Day 2016. Art for AIDS, we're going to talk about next with Hendrikus Bervoets. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for coming in. You're the Executive Director of Arts for AIDS International.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
We're an organization that raises awareness about HIV and AIDS and social justice issues in general. And we've done that not only in Canada, but in many cases in Africa. And we have a gallery in London, Ontario, and we exhibit quite regularly. And we would like more people to know about us.
Well, that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Hopefully more will.
Yeah.
Tell me how you got involved with it. What prompted this?
I got involved 15 years ago when I found out that one in 5 South Africans was HIV positive, and realized that many kids would ultimately be without parents, and that was the beginning. And I would never have thought that I might be doing this 15 years later.
Mm-hmm. And not just in London.
And not just in London. No, I travel at least three times a year to Africa, where we've worked in 7 different countries, predominantly though in the most southern part of Africa, and worked with many kids. Altogether, over the last 15 years, we've stopped counting at 15,000 that we have tried to educate as well as we can about the issue that matters so terribly much there. Mm-hmm. You see, HIV is the same in London, Ontario, except we talk about numbers that are staggeringly high. So, for example, we've started to work with teachers now in the 3 most prevalent HIV countries in the world, which is Lesotho, Swaziland, and Botswana, where the prevalence is more than 20%. So, and between 20 and 30%. So it's a massive amount of people that become HIV positive. And by the way, very few people ever talk about it. So the stigma associated with HIV in Africa is incredible. Nobody talks about it.
Well, and that's the thing. We're talking about World AIDS Day, and it's certainly an issue around the world. There's not a country that's not affected, but people forget that sub-Saharan Africa in particular seems to be the area where it's ridiculously high numbers still in 2016.
Yeah, you see, I haven't mentioned South Africa because South Africa is the #1 country in the world with staggering numbers of HIV. Luckily enough, fewer people are dying of AIDS because we have good antiretroviral drugs. So, and luckily enough, those that end up becoming very sick, being HIV positive, will actually ultimately get the drugs, and they're available now.
I was going to ask you that because it's one thing to have the drugs in this world available, but sometimes they don't get to the people who need them, especially people that, maybe people that are impoverished or people that live in rural areas. Maybe they just don't have access in the same way that we would have here.
And people that fear to go to a clinic, and there are many of them. And having worked with teachers now in the 3 different countries that I mentioned, very few of them will actually go and get tested on a regular basis, which, by the way, is something essentially very important.
Yeah, it's not enough to get tested once.
No. There, you need to get tested on a regular basis. And we've come up with a new idea, I believe it's new, that people before they have a sexual relationship, they should get tested together. And then somehow make a promise, I will not have anybody until I'm no longer in love with you, I no longer care about you, and I want to go with somebody else. And before they actually go with somebody else, they need to tell their partner, sorry, I no longer care about you.
Okay, understood. Now, I'd be remiss, it's Art for AIDS International. We haven't talked about art yet.
No.
Tell me where that fits in.
Well, the art fits in actually in a phenomenal way. The type of art that we do is collage making. It's easy to educate and it's fun. And part of the art makes the topic of the issues that we discuss light and pleasant. And people look forward to it. And in the end, it becomes very therapeutic. By the way, I create artwork, and most of the time I only do it when I'm slightly depressed.
Really?
So, yeah.
Why would that be?
I've never really thought about it. All I know is that when I travel and come back, in many cases maybe I enjoy what I do to the degree that when I come back, I run an organization. And that might not be as much fun as the work I do, that I really believe is essentially very important.
Just about out of time, but where can people see this? What are the hours? How can I see your work?
We are at One London Place on the 2nd floor, Suite 501. We're open from 11 to 5 Tuesdays to Fridays. And we do have a website, and I think that you have the website in front of you.
Yes, I do. It is artforaidsinternational.org.
It is,
okay.
And we like people to visit and to become connected and to realize that we save many lives from being miserable.
Well, thank you for coming in today.
You're very welcome.
Just out of time with you and just out of time for the show, too. So much in 1 hour. And World AIDS Day 2016 is here. Please take a moment to just get up on facts. Make sure you understand what the reality is, what the truth is, and get tested. That's very critical. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back again with the next Daytime.
Call the